And I'd humbly submit to you that nowhere else in the United States of America will you find a governor and a mayor, both senators and representatives, Democrats and Republicans, charter school advocates and teacher union leaders, businessmen and philanthropists, civic, faith, and community leaders, and parents, students, and citizens, all of whom are committed to finally answering the call of a nation at risk by seeing transformational instead of incremental reforms for the education of Cleveland's children.
It's now law.
We now have the legislative tools necessary to bring these models to scale, but starting new schools requires the capital needed to invest in new materials and equipment, professional training, school infrastructure, and technology, if these models are to succeed. Issue 107 allows us to deepen investments necessary to ensure that students graduate ready for a college, career, and the workforce.
On July 22nd, we will launch a citywide campaign that to me is as important as any political campaign you will see this election year. A campaign to get every Cleveland kid to school every day.
Get to school, you can make it.
I'm here to tell you something, and it's a very, very exciting time for me and for the board to say yes. We stand with 117 private colleges that are going to offer every student in the public school system of Cleveland, Ohio, free college tuition.
CMSD is a vastly different place than we were in 2011. Together, the momentum we are seeing from kindergarten to third grade literacy improvements, the momentum we are seeing on test scores from third grade through high school, and the momentum we are seeing on continuously increasing graduation rates earned us an overall grade of D on this year's report card, up from the F we earned last year. I want to make it clear, we are not celebrating a D. All that moving from an F to a D tells us is that we continue to move upward, but that we also have a lot more yet to achieve. I started the speech today by talking about Newton's laws, but up to now I haven't mentioned Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That law implies that our momentum can be stopped if an equal and opposite reaction is applied.
Health experts believed it was just a matter of time, and now the coronavirus is in Ohio. 3 cases in Cuyahoga County.
So we are announcing today that children of the state will have an extended spring break.
So my first memory of the pending shutdown was I was in Washington, D.C. At the time I was the chair of the Council of the Great City Schools, and I was briefing, getting ready for our March conference. And I got a call from Mayor Jackson, who said, I'm having a press conference at 1 o'clock and I'd like you to be there. And I said, well, Mayor, I'm in Washington, D.C., I can't be there. And I remember him chuckling and saying, you're still traveling? So I came home that night, and 2 days later, the governor announced that all schools were going on a 3-week spring break.
Everybody was thinking we just get an extra week off, that's an extra week of no homework, we get to just have fun and relax. And then 1 week turned into 2, 2 turned into 3, and then next thing you know, we're supposed to be having summer break.
It was a weird thing. It was a transition that I don't think anybody was ready for, because it happened so abruptly and so suddenly. But we only thought it was temporary, so we thought we could just deal with it, smoothly, just because it was going to be temporary. But when it began to be prolonged, it became like a real wake up, like, wait a minute, this is more serious than we think.
We don't know what to do when COVID-19 hit because we didn't know what it was. So we were just scared at home, studying, sleeping, having nothing to do. We were at the lowest version of ourselves.
I have worked in the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, Cleveland Public Schools, Cleveland Municipal School District for a total of 48 years as of this August. And these last 2 years since the pandemic have been by far the most challenging years of my career.
we really did start with thinking about it as an extended spring break. And so we printed a lot of materials that kids and families could pick up just to stay engaged. We opened food sites and we're running buses to deliver people to the food sites and then bring them back to the schools in their community, all kind of short-term responses. But as that 3 weeks went on, it became increasingly clear that it wasn't just going to be 3 weeks. And so I would say in hindsight, had we known that, we would have got a faster jump on it. But we immediately had to figure out how to take those short-term things and make them long-term.
Welcome, everybody. Hi. We are
C
M
S
D. It's so great to see you on this bright Monday morning. Come
and
learn
with
us. Have a great time.
Looking back at those very early days in March and April of 2020, we started with a short-term response that immediately became clear was going to be a much longer term. How do you feed people in the long term? How do you print materials and get it in the hands, which we actually ended up mailing to homes? How do you use TV and Channel 43 so that people can still be getting instruction when they don't have devices and that sort of thing? How do you get people connected in America's worst connected city, right?
Before the pandemic, I would provide a lot of support and, going to the hospitals in person, translating for parents to understand the medical care. I'm supporting with clothing and other needs. But then when the pandemic, we had to totally shift. And now we are ensuring, continue to ensure that they have food, but also internet, laptops, helping them understand.
We miss you, Mary.
Where do I get tested? I'm having symptoms. But I called this pharmacy and they're full, just helping them navigate, because it was hard. It was hard for us to schedule an appointment. So, can you imagine families that, don't know the language or they're not used to, having to troubleshoot and navigate all these, difficult systems. And then some families didn't have transportation. But then you don't have, a neighbor that wants to take you because we're all isolated. So there was a lot of so many issues, during COVID that we tried to be able, be able to assist them.
Every school district in America, along with lots of other organizations, now needs to figure out how to work and learn at home. So everybody is scrambling to buy devices, tablets, laptops, hotspots. Much of that comes from China. So we were making massive buys and buying stuff that had to be shipped from China. One of the things we learned is how much freight is shipped in commercial airlines in the belly of planes that weren't flying. And so we ended up at one point having, thousands of devices that we had purchased sitting on a dock in China. We had another purchase that 10 days before it was due to arrive, we were informed by the vendor that they weren't going to fill that order at all, not just delayed, but at all, and had to scramble to rebuy. There was that immediate shortage of the tools necessary to function in this new space. I also remember at the time, that we weren't equipped to image, literally thousands of devices. And so, I spent days at schools opening devices, loading content in, working 20 devices at a time so that we could get 36,000 devices out the door. Being at Paul Dunbar in the middle of the night imaging because school was starting tomorrow and the devices weren't ready yet,
Teachers volunteered to pass out devices to kids so that we could initially meet with them. At that point, Zoom was a new thing. A couple people had heard about it, but it wasn't the thing that everybody knew how to work. So we did some things where we played on our phones with each other, teachers. We had Zoom meetings on phones with each other to say, hey, well, this platform might be able to work. If we can meet kids here, we can do this here.
When someone told me about logging on to Teams, it was like, okay, so do we put on uniforms, or what kind of teams are we talking about here, you know? But just learning the whole, you know, the whole Schoology, the Microsoft 365 and the capabilities of it, that's definitely something that's always going to resonate with me.
Remote learning, it was hard, I should say, because it's like waking up every day and opening the computer wasn't for everybody. It's like, because you're in your own home, it's like you stand in front of a game, TV, and they'd rather have you open the computer and do school. And I think nobody really into that for real.
I teach math. Math is an exact science. It's very hard to teach mathematics online or through a computer to a kid who doesn't know what one-to-one correspondence is, doesn't know what a number is. And I'm literally now charged with teaching mathematics, teaching, you know, addition facts. It's a very difficult thing. If I can't present a manipulative to a child that is struggling and they're on a computer, it makes it almost impossible for them to learn the material.
For deaf and hard of hearing students, moving to remote was a whole slew of challenges that we had to overcome. The very challenging thing for students is usually, you know, when you're in a classroom, you've got the teacher and you have the interpreter, and the student can track between the teacher and the interpreter to see, okay, I can watch their lips moving and I can see the interpreter, what they're signing, I can track back and forth, and then also see what's going on behind us, you know, so they have visual access to everything. But on Zoom, you know, if you're screen sharing, everything is taken over by that screen. And so trying to figure out, okay, do you know how to pin? Do I have to pin, you know, before spotlighting came into play? And so having to find those accessibility tools that allowed our deaf and hard of hearing students to see the screen, to have captions on the screen, to see the interpreter as, you know, that same video is happening and me being a tiny box and my hands being this small, you know. So it was very challenging visually.
Everybody had their cameras off. Like, you couldn't see nobody's faces. It was camera off or a black screen. It's just like the connections with the teachers and the students, it was not there. Or most people would be either like tired or just not engaged.
For some students, it just didn't work. The online did not work. It was too stressful for them. And I think it really affected their mental health. They had to show their rooms, how they lived. You know, some students live in a very poor neighborhood and they don't have, you know, their rooms in a way they would like to show their friends, you know. So I know it was hard. It was hard for the families that didn't understand how to work with a computer. We had some grandparents trying to teach their kids, you know, making sure that they get their education, but they didn't know how to turn on a computer, you know. So here we are, you know, trying to make sure all the families have, you know, their basic needs like food, but also making sure that they get educated on, even, you know, grandparents. We did Zoom video conferences with the families and grandparents, just showing them, okay, this is how you turn on a computer, and this is how you know, look up, so they could ensure that their kids was, you know, still learning and still participating in the daily activities.
My two younger brothers were in middle school at that time, so we would always be like back and forth, like, hey, I'm on a Zoom call, I need you guys to be quiet. We're on different schedules. It was just yelling about that, and then not wanting to wake up, so having to make sure everyone was up. And then I was automatically the tutor for everyone, and I'm like, I'm trying to focus on my own stuff, and I can't help you with your 5th grade math. It was just a big mess. It was very chaotic.
I didn't realize how much energy I personally got and get from kids and learning and access until I had none. There was no standing in the back of a Zoom room, you know. My popping in became an incredible disruption. And so I found myself suddenly without a lot of kid contact. And that also meant that, you know, when our School of the Arts students did their dance around their beds in their bedroom and choreographed it, those things were so meaningful to me because I just had so many fewer of them.
Something that I can remember that was was when they were doing the state testings for the kids, which was different, was that I had some parents coming over to my house and we were setting up tables in each room because they didn't know how to log in and they were having issues. And I'm like, just come over to my house. I'll put her in one room. I'll have my kid on the other and the other one in the other room. And I thought, you know, even though we were social distancing, that kind of helped keep some of the families together, or friendship in a way.
We would receive donations from different community partners. We had teachers volunteer their time to meet up at a specific place, and we would get the big donation and separate, let's say, okay, so we're gonna serve 50 families. Make sure that we were reaching out to those families and providing them with hygiene products, food. We also had games. We would give them games because some kids were just, you know, they would say, like, I'm so bored. You know, I can't go out, you know, I can't go to the park, I can't play the sport that I was used to playing. And it was really bringing them down. So we started like, okay, so maybe they need a board game.
We made home visits to kids who had not responded to phone calls. It was very effective because it let us know one or two things. Was there internet access at home? Could you log in? Did you live there anymore? Did you choose to go to another district in another setting because they offer in-person learning? Which we had all of those cases. And then we also found out who just wasn't logging in and was supposed to. You know, you were able to help them as well.
We saw a lot of young children that weren't able to get on to school or get on to school because of care issues. We saw middle school students who were often asked to take care of themselves at a time developmentally where you're not very self-directed, you know. We saw high school students vanish because they went to work, and it wasn't, you know, reluctant learners that had already struggled in school and they vanished. It was kids across the spectrum. You know, I remember a student on track to be a valedictorian that just stopped coming to school because the student picked up a job and needed to help their family. And so we saw all kinds of attendance disruptions in that remote and hybrid period of time.
I kind of dropped down throughout COVID, and it was like lack of motivation. I didn't feel like there was really any point because I didn't really see anything coming from it.
Friday night.
Z1079 is taking you to prom.
Live on the radio. That's right. CMSD seniors, we're doing it just for you. It's me, DJ KY, and I want to help you have prom.
And then the questions started coming about, well, are we going to have prom? We have Senior Honor Day here where the students actually receive their scholarships on that day. So we were getting all kinds of phone calls. Are we still going to hold these events? And if not, why not? And can't we do this instead? Can you make this adjustment? Can you make that adjustment? So we were being bombarded with all kinds of suggestions as to how to pull things off despite the pandemic, all the way up to and including graduation. There were several that didn't think that we had to do a drive-through graduation. Well, this district is holding it, you know, in person, and you just let one person walk in and walk across the stage. So all of that is coming in, and we're trying to adhere to what the district is saying. No, this is what everyone is going to do, and explain that to your parents and to your students. and get them to understand that this is not something punitive that we're doing. We're trying to do the best thing that we possibly can and be as safe as we possibly can, because we don't have a clue what this virus is all about, and we don't need anyone getting sick and, you know, worst case scenario, dying from it. So please just bear with us and know that we'll get through this together.
You know, I remember thinking, how do we shepherd our community through this? You know, our parents and our kids and our educators. And so I remember like every message that we put out, and I was putting out videos once a week that I was recording off of a fake teleprompter that, you know, our tech team helped me turn my computer into, sitting in my upstairs den, you know. But I remember that every message had to say, it's gonna be okay, and here's what we're gonna do. Even at times when I didn't know what we were gonna do, and I didn't know if it was gonna be okay. But the message had to say, it's gonna be okay, and here's what we're gonna do.
Thank you for continuing to work closely with us to make the best of this international crisis. Please keep washing your hands, wear your face mask, and practice social distancing. It's what will make the difference in the long run. I hope that you and each of your loved ones remain safe, healthy, and well. Thank you.
Hello, CMSD and City of Cleveland educators, and welcome to the East Technical High School COVID-19 Vaccination Center. Today I'm going to walk you through the process you can expect when you get your vaccine.
As we have moved through the pandemic and navigated as best as we could, mental health concerns have heightened because it's a lot to digest. It's a lot for us as adults to digest and understand and put it in perspective. It's definitely a lot for us to expect for our scholars to do that. And so understanding how to address the feelings of isolation, how to address the feelings of self-harm, how to address the feelings of not belonging or feeling like I belong to a group, or not being able to understand how to work out a tiff or a riff with a friend, has created some anxiety with our students. And it's important that as a family support specialist, we get those needs addressed.
I felt that when we returned from being in a remote setting and coming back into an in-person setting, even though we were going hybrid, there was a certain sense of trust that I had to ensure, and not just me, but our staff community had to ensure the families that we were going to do everything possible to ensure their safety. And it was my responsibility as an administrator to ensure the staff that I was going to do everything possible to ensure their safety, because there was this huge fear people had. And we need to remember, people lost their loved ones, and there was someone that we knew that was highly impacted because of this virus, and people were fearful. So our goal was to make sure that we continue to have this community where we are ensuring the safety for our families, we are ensuring the safety for our students, for our staff, and that was our number one priority.
So coming back to school, I was relieved and happy to see a classroom setting again, just as the kids were. Now, they might not have been socially prepared for it, but they absolutely were excited to come back to school.
It was kind of like a relief, but also like a shock, because it was like we took like another big step off of like being out of school for a long time.
Having ninth graders come to high school, knowing that their last full time in a school setting, a formal school setting, was sixth grade, that in itself too was a challenge. I spoke to the staff prior to the school year starting and simply just reminded them that we can't expect the freshmen to come in like freshmen of old. They are going to come in acting just like they're still in middle school. And we've got to allow them some time to get that middle school blood, I call it, out of their system and get them acclimated to high school.
With my daughter was more with concern. Like she always like, but what if I get sick, Mom? So they were concerned about getting sick, going back to school. And that, as a parent, I was concerned too. But I know that it was important for them to go back to school and start to socialize again.
The kids were different. They came to school different. We had students crying, like in a crisis, and I would be like, what's going on? And they're like, my classmate doesn't want to put her mask on. You know, they were scared.
We found students walked out the classroom, they put their head down, they would put their headphones in, listen to music. They used it as a coping mechanism for stress. They were tired, they did not know how to handle the personal interaction, so they shut down. And we talked to our teachers about it, and we wanted them to see this is what they go through. That not only are they dealing with the school aspect, their home lives, their social lives, they have to relearn what it's like to be out in society again.
Some of my friends, some went to school, they were still taking it serious. And a lot of friends before I went to Adams after the pandemic, a lot of them just stopped attending high school, period, like a whole lot.
The group that came back one quarter, it was still, while we were hybrid, it was still like they were, online. The few that came in, they did not interact with each other hardly at all, even all the way up to the prom, when the seniors had the prom. We had a beautiful venue down at Windows on the River, and it was like they were total strangers.
We had students that were cutting, that they didn't know how to process what they were feeling. And those students, we were able to provide services. But when you provide a service to a student, what about the families, So we also have to talk with the families and get them connected with services as well.
I think one of the most major challenges, and definitely something that was very difficult to wake up in the morning, was to see how I was going to staff all the classrooms. So, for example, I usually might start the night before where teachers may text me, I'm going to be out, and then they would report into the sub-center. And so every morning we pull a report. So I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I would look at the report, and they'll tell you if there's a sub or not. And I want to say 95% of the time there is no sub. So what do I do? If I have 7 teachers out, or if I have 5 teachers out, how do I make sure that there's a teacher in that classroom, for our children, to be able to get their education for that day? The other part of it that I don't think people really realize is that since there was no subs, the people that were covering the classes were the teachers, or the assistant principal, or myself, or my dean, and which meant that there was no breaks. So if you're a teacher, you start at 9:05, you're done at 4:06, you get a 40-minute lunch, and if you have to use the bathroom, you usually have to ask a colleague to kind of watch your class to go use the bathroom, but that's all you get. And if you're teaching during your planning to cover for a class, there's no breaks at all. And so then what happens with your planning? Your planning has to be done at home, or it has to be done after school or before school. And it's just this ongoing cycle that becomes so exhausting.
Welcome to Robert H. Jameson, first day of school.
We're back. We thought attendance would rebound, and what we found instead was that the numbers actually looked very much like what we had seen during the shutdown period. And when I asked my student advisory committee to explain it to me, they told me 4 things that really made sense. I mean, the first is that the amount of stress that they're experiencing, they're taking mental health days. And I remember saying this to a parent who said, it's funny, I just let my kids take a mental health day last week, and I probably wouldn't have done that pre-pandemic. So we know that was a thing, right? The second was that they were still having these extra responsibilities of working or taking care of siblings and sort of thing, and that you know, Mr. Gordon, in schools, you don't understand all the other things we have to do to support our families. The third was fear. You know, our families were very afraid of these brand new vaccines that got rushed out and so weren't going to get vaccinated. And at the same time, they were afraid of getting sick. And so if somebody at school got sick, I'm not coming back to school until I'm sure that I'm not going to get sick. And so we would see these, mass absences when there was a suspicion that somebody might have gotten COVID. And then the fourth, which actually I think is one of the bright sides of the pandemic, is kids really said, you got to make this worth it. We're not just going to keep playing this game. So, we were, compliant before. We would come to school and do what we're supposed to do. And, if I'm college bound, I'll take my AP classes because I'm supposed to. But you've got to really make school worth it. And so, that's really helped us to leverage the pandemic with our new learning vision. That really came from feedback in part from kids.
The one thing that I can say is that we're all survivors of the same trauma. The pandemic affected everyone. So regardless of the extent of how far or how heightened your experience was in the pandemic, we all survived it. So that is the one thing that is a commonality amongst everybody. Teachers, principals, students, other staff members, we all survive the same trauma. So that gives us a common ground to work from.
I really challenged my team to think with me about, I've quoted Audre Lorde so many times that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And we were using the tools of the system we had that was started in the 1800s, very industrialized. But that wasn't really going to change anything. And so what could we do given the fact that these systems have really been blown up, right? And so we challenged ourselves to come up with our new learning vision, which I'm really excited about because I'm seeing it come alive. It's not fully there, but come alive. That, first of all, it's about equity. We want a more fair, just, and good system of education. We know we won't solve every inequity, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try really, really hard. In our vision, we want every one of our learners, and that's both students and adults, to be individually and collectively engaged, because learning is a balance of actions and reflections, and reflecting individually is good, but reflecting collectively is better. We want our learners engaged in what we call academically complex tasks. That language was really intentional because most schools say rigorous, but if I ask 10 people the definition of rigor, they all give different ones. Kids will just tell you that means it's hard. But an academically complex task you can describe very specifically. We want those tasks to be worthy of what we call productive struggle. The learner, kids and adults, have to want to figure out the task. They should be willing to try and fail and try again. They should be willing to work in a group, maybe do a micro lesson on that math that now I need and have a purpose for, do some research. We're pretty good at creating complex tasks. We're less good at making sure they're things that are actually worth our time and energy. And then we want our learners to be able to demonstrate their learning in really authentic ways. And we want it to be fun. We want it to be a joyful and adventurous environment. And I'm really excited about that because even in the toughness of the last year, and it was a tough year, probably even harder than the shutdown period. Not probably, certainly more difficult than the shutdown period. And yet, I watched kids and adults all over the system, demonstrating learning of really complex tasks that they struggled with, and answering questions about not only their academic content, but the skills they'll take into the next project. So I had to collaborate, and collaborating meant that I had to, be willing to compromise with the partners in my team, and really explicitly bringing to life this vision of what school and learning could be compared to what it was pre-pandemic.
I think we all know when there's so much going on in our heads, the ability to learn becomes very difficult. And so ensuring that we're creating systems for students to have a voice, to express how they're feeling, allows them to reduce that anxiety so that they can learn.
we have a lot of work to do. It's not over. It's not over by any means. We have a lot of more support to give. We have a lot of more issues to address so that our scholars can continue to move forward. And we can't expect for them to move forward if we don't have the support that they need to break those barriers, to get over those bridges, to get over those humps, to, you know, smooth out those rough places so that they can matriculate through school.
We learned that when it was required of us, we could innovate very, very quickly. I hope that we don't lose that as the world seeks a sense of balance and normalcy again. There was a rising acknowledgement of long known inequities that people could not ignore, and therefore had to acknowledge that we have an opportunity not to turn our back on again. So how do we really address deep poverty in this community? How do we address the digital divide that still exists? You know, things of those natures. So I think that's an opportunity. I do see educators in our district really trying these new things, and we learned to give people grace and space to have some practice space, you know, to make it safe for our adults. I hope we don't lose that, you know, because we had to say when you're learning all these tools, look, we're not evaluating you right now, let's just figure this out. And you know, that innovation came up, but also the safety that you could try and risk and do things differently. So I think there are things that intellectually we have learned that have changed, that could change us if we are smart enough to seize them as opportunities. My fear, though, is that in our desire for normalcy, we could actually lose some of those lessons and not actually be changed in those positive ways. So we'll see.